Hey everyone, it is George Couros, and I wanted to do kind of an epic book review. And every time I do that, and even if I did that, I get copyright strikes. So I don't want to do that today. But this is actually what you're seeing on the screen right now is an email I'm about to send out, and I wanted to try this. Typically, I either podcast about something and then I write about it, or I'll write about something and then I podcast about it. But I'm not totally done this email, so you're seeing kind of a draft of it, if anything. And I just wanted to kind of talk it out and share some ideas. And what I'll be talking about is a book called "Don't Believe Everything That You Think" by Joseph Nguyen. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Nguyen, and so I apologize to the author if I'm not saying that correctly. And I wrote about some of the quotes that resonate with me in this book. And it was like a really fascinating book. And full disclosure, and I talk about this in the email, one of the reasons I wrote about it is because I do have anxiety, have really bad anxiety. And I've had depression, for a long time. And I didn't put this in the email, but I think, it's something I deal with. I don't want to say I struggle with. It's just who I am. It's just part of who I am. And I think in some ways, and I've talked about this before, I believe that in some ways it helps me have a better understanding of other people. And I always try to look for, even in our struggles, what is the benefit? So that's something I think about. But I do deal with anxiety, and I can tell you straight up, it is because I overthink everything. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to pick up this book. And I found it really, really powerful. And it actually was interesting. One of the quotes that really stuck out to me is "Thoughts create, thinking destroys." And do you put your brain into a state where you are able to, generate new ideas and thoughts as opposed to overthinking stuff? Many people that I know, one of the flaws, and I don't want to say maybe flaws is not the correct terminology, but one of the things they struggle with is they put so much thinking into ideas that they don't actually move towards action. It's something I'll talk about before. Whereas I, full disclosure, I just go. So in some parts of my life, overthinking is an issue, and in other parts of my life, maybe underthinking is the issue. So who knows? But it's something I just kind of want to create. And I wasn't planning on doing this, but I like to publish a podcast, a solo one every Thursday. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to try something new, try something different, just jump in. So I appreciate you being here with me. I will tell you, I really highly suggest this book. I really found it fascinating, and it's helpful. And there's a little, I'll read some of the synopsis that is discovered on Amazon. You can actually find the link to the book in the description down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. I'd love to know any of your thoughts. So please like and subscribe. I promise I would do this. I know I should have done that earlier. But share any comments, any of your takeaways. If you've read this book, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it as well. So this is the synopsis of the book from Amazon. It says, in this book, you'll discover the root cause of all psychological and emotional suffering and how to end it. How to become unaffected by negative thoughts and feelings. How to experience unconditional love, peace, and joy in the present, no matter what our external circumstances look like. How to instantly create a new experience of life if you don't like the one you're in right now. How to break free from a negative thought loop when we inevitably get caught in one. How to let go of anxiety. This is the big reason I wrote this. Self-doubt, self-sabotage, and any self-destructive habits. How to effortlessly create from a state of abundance, flow, and ease. How to develop the superpower of being okay with not knowing and uncertainty. Boy, I need some work on that. And how to access your intuition and inner wisdom that goes beyond the limitations of your thinking. No matter what has happened to you, where you're from, or what you have done, you can still find a total peace, unconditional love, complete fulfillment, and abundance of joy in your life. No person is an exception to this. Darkness only exists because of the light, which means even our darkest hour, light must exist. Within the pages of this book contains timeless wisdom to empower you with the understanding of our mind's infinite potential to create any experience of life that we want, no matter the external circumstances. Don't believe everything you think is about rewiring your brain, rewriting your past, positive thinking, or anything of the sort. We cannot solve our problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. That quote right there really sticks out to me, because that is something I think about in terms not only personally but in education, is that a lot of times we're trying to maybe solve problems that sometimes we've created in education ourselves. And for example, off the top of my head, why are teachers sometimes disillusioned with education? Because one of my arguments is that we constantly focus on data. And I'm not saying you shouldn't look at data, but when you're data driven, for example, you actually negate one of the things that teachers wanted to teach as kids. That's why I talk about the notion of learner driven. There's a disconnect there. But there's also sometimes we are trying to maybe solve the wrong problem, right? We're focusing so much on kids being good at school that it doesn't necessarily help them outside of it. So it's just something I want to think about. Tactics are temporary and expansion of consciousness is permanent. This book was written to help you go beyond your thinking and discover the truth of what you already intuitively know deep inside your soul. That quote right there, right at the end of it, I know it's not from the book, it's just from the description. And I think they talk about this in the book. I read the whole book. It's a quick read. Is that a lot of times when we make decisions in our life or we're struggling with a decision, we know the right thing to do, but it's really hard to do it sometimes. And I think one of the things that Nguyen talks about in the book is the idea that you typically know the answer. And if you know, you should do it, even when it's hard. But sometimes we struggle between two ideas, and sometimes you got to go. So there's a lot of stuff that it says it will solve. Does any book do that? I don't know. Maybe for someone, not necessarily for me, but I read it really because I thought about this in the terms of my anxiety. So I want to share some of the thinking with you. And I already talked about this. We cannot solve our problems at the same level of consciousness that created them. So these are some of the quotes that really stuck out to me. Not all of them are from the author, but they are shared in the book. So the first one is this one. You are like this cup, so full of ideas that nothing more will fit in. Come back to me with an empty cup. And this is a Zen proverb. When I first read this quote, one of the things that I thought about was my parents and the restaurant they actually used to run when I was a child and all the way through high school. And I remember my mom and dad talking to me about the people they like to hire. They actually wanted to hire people with no experience in the field of, working in a restaurant. And I never really understood it, but I remember them saying to me that one of the things that was really helpful when they hired someone who came there that had no experience was that they didn't actually, if you had experience, you not only had to train the person, you had to untrain them. So a lot of things that maybe they wanted to be done were like untraining habits out of people. So you basically come and when you didn't have the experience, you were a little bit more moldable. And it doesn't mean that you don't know anything when you're walking into a restaurant, a school, or things like that. And I'm not saying you should hire, people in education that have never taught. That's not what I'm saying at all. Or never went into the field of education. But sometimes when we kind of think about people in education, especially like when someone says, I hear this a lot of times, to be honest, yeah, bugs me. Like you shouldn't be talking to educators unless you've taught X amount of years, blah, blah, blah. But when you say stuff like that, it really bothers me in the sense that, would you say that to a brand new teacher who maybe doesn't have the experience, but maybe looks at things a little bit differently? Because of that empty cup, they're not necessarily warped to have a certain perspective on how things should be done. And when you think about that, do we create the space where we're just trying to replicate what's always been done? Or do we try to create new experiences that are better than the ones that we have used before? one of the posts that I shared, and I'll also link this down below. You can actually see all of this because I will link the newsletter that I shared with my audience in this podcast, is talking about fresh eyes. That when you walk into your building, whether it's been there, if you've been there, for example, one day or 100 years, to go into the day, look at it like you've never been there before. Because when you continuously go into the same place over and over and over again, you become numb to what's there. And when you walk in and you don't necessarily have preconceived notions, but you just kind of look at things when you come in with that empty cup, you start to notice things a little bit differently, and you get used to this. And that's, that's the first thing I thought of, is that when we create these experiences, do we simply try to recreate what's always been done because we have a certain notion of what education should look like, and then we just try to recreate it? Or do we actually go in with an empty cup thinking, hey, there's some different opportunities that we might not have thought about ourselves? The other thing I thought about talking about this, sometimes when we're in the middle of a situation, we're so full of ideas and information because we are in the middle of it. When you take a step outside yourself, then you can actually give yourself better advice. Because when you are in the middle of something, you don't notice whether it's good or bad. I shared actually a story on Instagram just this past week about, and again, this will be in the newsletter linked below, is I actually worked in, I did it for one day. I couldn't last past one day. It was a pig farm. And I was contracted, this is when I was very young, to clean out pig crap. I know, and it was like, there was a disease in it. They had to get rid of all the pigs that were there, and you had to clean it. It had to be clean. It was going to be months and months and months of doing this. And I remember actually pulling up to the farm, and it stunk so bad. It was so gross. And then I went inside. I was like, ugh, and I was going to die because it was so bad. And I spent 12 hours just spraying this stuff into a drain. And you just had to do it. You were literally up to your stomach in it. It was so bad. You wore these plastic overalls. And then I remember it was just you become numb to it. You don't even notice it after a little while. And then I remember walking out of the barn, and I remember pulling up how gross it was. And when I walked out after a full day, I was like, oh, it smells so good outside. And when you're in it, you don't notice it. When you walk out of it, you think differently. And that's something I thought about when I read this quote, is when you are in the middle of something, you are so full of ideas that you have to learn to take a step outside of yourself. Something I didn't share in the newsletter. I remember I was in a relationship a long, long time ago. And I remember talking about it with a mentor of mine and all the things I had struggled with. And I was explaining. And it was the weirdest thing. I remember I almost felt like I went out of my body during the conversation. And then it was like me listening to me. And I was like, what are you doing? Why would you be in this? And please don't think I was I think the best thing when you walk out of a relationship, don't blame someone else why you walked out, because that doesn't help you in the future, right? I would, but it was not a good situation, honestly, for either of us. And I remember it was just kind of clicked because I felt like I went out of my body, and it wasn't intentional at all, but it's something I always think about. When you're in a situation, what advice would you give to yourself as a friend? And kind of taking away some of those preconceived notions. So that's what I got out of that quote. The next one is this: if you want to stay alive, nourish your body. If you want to feel alive, nourish your soul. Love this quote. And I think, when I do these podcasts, this is a way, I know this sounds weird, to kind of nourish my soul. I love talking about this stuff. I really love reading. And I spend a lot of time reading and podcast. I know it's you're listening to a podcast, about someone who's in education, and you might be listening because you are an educator. I don't really listen to many education podcasts because I feel sometimes that, if I do this podcast, I write stuff, I read about education, or listen to podcasts about education, that you become so consumed that you can't, kind of going back to the other one, you don't learn to take a step outside. Whereas I try to, when I, go for running, I listen to stuff that isn't really, deep in thinking. It's about sports. I remember talking about, you might not like the show Family Guy or The Simpsons, something like that. I used to watch those shows, and I'm not saying you shouldn't watch them, but I used to watch them because they did not make me think. Sometimes I just want to watch stuff that, doesn't make me think. And there is a little nourishment. Sometimes I go on TikTok, like I will say, it's not really good to spend 8 hours on your phone, but sometimes I need like 30 minutes just scrolling through TikTok, having a laugh, just to kind of like rejuvenate myself. I tend to always do this. I used to do this with Vine, if you can believe that. In airports, I missed it, that the Vine TikTok space where there's not anything like that, where after a full day of speaking, it was just like, so I just couldn't think about education anymore. I just couldn't talking education. I just need to do something mindless. And so I really think about things I do outside of education that make me, I feel a better educator, whether it's going to sporting events, whether it's running, whether it's exercising, whether it's reading books on this. Sometimes when you walk away from the thing that you do all the time, it actually gives you some ideas. You get a different perspective. And, every morning I try to work out, take my dog for a walk, do push-ups. And one of the things I do not do is I try not to look at my email, because I need the things to like kind of nourish my soul before I do the stuff that could sometimes be soul sucking. I'm sure, if you're in education, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So when you do that, I think it doesn't just make you more relatable with students, with your community, because they see you as this is one thing I've always said, it is important to be a human that is an educator, not an educator who happens to be human. Those things make you more relatable. But sometimes my best ideas in education, or the things I've tried, have come from a run, have come from when I'm at something that has nothing to do with education. When you take some distance, there's actually a lot of research. I wrote about it in Innovate Outside the Box. There's a lot of research that, some of your best ideas come in the shower because you're not really thinking about it. And when you actually don't think, that's when some of your best thoughts come to life. And I think that's kind of the whole premise of the book. The next quote: there are two sources of goals created out of inspiration and goals created out of desperation. I want to expand, because, it's easier to share this in an image. I wanted to share a little bit more of this thinking from Nguyen in this book. Goals from desperation are typically rooted in fear and make your happiness conditional on achieving them. Goals from inspiration are rooted in love and focus more on the joy of doing over the outcome. The joy comes from the act itself, not just what you externally get out of it. The reason why you create the goal will determine how you will feel while pursuing it. I love talking education. I love talking about, things and trying to make connections. One of the things I'm really passionate about is looking at things that have nothing to do with education and seeing how does this apply to what we do in school. That's something I'm really passionate about, because I think, we're not trying to get kids prepared for the real world in the future. The world is real right now. And how do you actually take these things that really, really matter and connect them? And so when I read this quote, as a publisher, one of the things I get all the time is people saying to me, "Hey, I want to write a book." I'm like, "Okay, tell me more." Well, it's something I've always wanted to do. I'm like, "Okay, but like, do you want to write a book? Because you said, in your mind that you want to write a book, or do you feel you have something to say that you really want to get out to the world? Because if you write a book because you want to check a box that you've written a book, or you are, you're just, you want to maybe make money from it, which is like, hey, we all gotta eat. We all gotta make money. I get it. But I feel for me, and maybe I don't think I'm unique in this. It is more important for me that you feel you have something really important to share with the world, because your passion will build an audience. People will be drawn to that. If people feel you're just jumping on a trend or writing a book for the sake of writing a book, that to me is when books fail. That's when they disconnect. I didn't share this in the email. Allison Apsey and I talked about what makes a great principal. And it was interesting because I had talked to her about the idea. It was like a follow-up to because of a teacher, very specific principle to school principals and school leadership. And I talked to her about it, and then she was kind of on my case about it. But I was like, you know what, Allison, I know I brought it up. I'm not ready. I'm just not ready. And it wasn't because I didn't have ideas. It's not because I didn't thinking. I just didn't feel the passion for it. And it wasn't until I read her book, Leading the Whole Teacher, that I was like, okay, now I got it. And now this makes sense to me. And that was like over a year after I first pitched the idea to her, because now I was passionate about something. Now it mattered to me. And now it was not a desperation goal because I felt I needed to follow up a book, but it was like an inspiration goal. I feel now I have something that I really want to share. And that book, I'm very proud of it. It's the same with Innovator's Mindset. I never set out like, I'm going to write a book on innovation. That was not it at all. I had been blogging, I think 5 or 6 years prior to that book coming out. And what I realized is the more I was writing, the more I was focusing on innovation. And then all of a sudden I felt I got something to say here. Like, this is something I'm really passionate about. I can feel it because the more I focus on writing about this, talking about this, there's something I'm really excited about. And it's something that drives me. And, I'm not a trend jumper. I don't just go do stuff because I think, hey, this is pertinent education right now. I maybe it's a bad term, but I stay in my lane. And my lane is the stuff I'm passionate about, and I stay there, right? Like, AI is something I'm building a passion on, but I didn't just jump on the AI trend because I knew, like, if I'm out there first, then I'll be there. But I've always talked about change, about emerging technologies, but it's also like I want to learn it and have a deep understanding of it from myself first, and then explain it to others, not just like, hey, I want to get on the AI train. So I think if you're like thinking about doing something, don't think about what would make money. Here's a box I want to check. Find what you love and think, hey, like, if there's something you really are excited about, that's what you want to talk about. And that's that inspiration goal that Nguyen talks about. By the way, it was funny because I wrote about this and I remembered just when I wrote about it, I actually got a comment because Innovator's Mindset, I'm telling you, if you write something you're passionate about, people will catch on to that. And 10 years after the fact, after I wrote this, Edu Metaverse on Instagram wrote this comment in response to a quote I shared from the book. 10 years after it was written, this book has truly changed my life. I'm telling you that you don't understand the impact you can have by sharing what you're passionate about. And that for me was like, this is something I'm really passionate about. And she caught on to it, and it was contagious. And I'm so grateful that I got that. And, when people say that, because, people, I guarantee everyone listening to you, you have changed somebody's life. Whether they've told you or not is a totally other thing. But I promise you that's happened. And it's so grateful when people say this. And I wrote a little TLDR. If you don't love the process, the product probably won't turn out that great. That inspiration goal is something that should drive you. One last quote, because I typically do 3, but it's just there's too many good things here. But while our minds do an incredible job of keeping us alive, the same ability does not allow us to thrive. I think that to me says a lot about the book. It's really kind of put in a space where you're not overthinking things, but you're being thoughtful of kind of what you want to pursue, who you want to become. And when you overthink, tend to talk yourself out of stuff. That is something I connected. And I the irony of this is I wrote about it. I wrote about this. I put a lot of thought into this email, into this podcast. But as you noticed, I just turn on the camera. I don't have a script or anything like that. It's just like, hey, what will these quotes inspire me? When I write my emails, when I write my blog posts, it's very rare I have, it's like, hey, I really want to talk about this. Let's see where it goes. And that's kind of how I write. And I hope that my passion comes off the pages, comes out through this podcast. But hey, I highly recommend this book. Hopefully, if the podcast didn't work for you, maybe the newsletter, and you can share with others as well too. If you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, I try to share some ideas, some thinking, try to have a little fun, a little light. But thanks for being here on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. And I don't know what you think of this format. I'd love to hear from you if you enjoy it. If you're listening, check it out on YouTube because you can see some of the visuals if that's helpful to you. But Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. Highly suggest it. Thanks for being here today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.